Kicking off the list at number 10, Election Day. Known as the most corrupt pope in the history of the Catholic Church, Rodrigo Borgia, even before he became the big talk of the town, he bribed his way to get there. Yeah, shocker. They were Spanish-speaking nobles who rose to their power all over the Italian peninsula during the Renaissance. And it certainly helped when Rodrigo's uncle, Alfonso de Borgia, became Pope Calixtus III come 1455. They say it's all about who you know, and that was the case for these relatives. He was the first ever pope in history to acknowledge his children, which, like many things on this list, was super controversial at the time. But it only gets better.
Number 9. Lions, tigers, mistresses, and children. So as far as I learned in church, priests, especially the Pope, weren't allowed to have children because there was this whole chastity thing. I don't know. However, back in the Borgia's time, it was actually quite common for popes to have mistresses and father children. However, it wasn't acknowledged, and for the most part, it was hidden. Pope Alexander made the bold choice of not only acknowledging his children, but spoiling them. The same for his mistresses. Everyone knew! He fathered 4 children with a Roman noblewoman named Venosa Catanei, Geoffrey, Juan, and most famously Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. He did everything he could to advance their careers, marrying them off to rich relations, and even made Cesare head of the military. Their complicated careers didn't stray far from the limelight, adding even more to their illustrious careers of the Borgias.
Number 8. Familiar face. The face of Jesus Christ has appeared in the most bizarre places. Most of the time, it's toast. I don't know why, it's always a toast. No idea why, but European depictions of Jesus Christ, believe it or not, are based off Cesare Borgia's face. Imagine somebody using your face for the Lord's. It's kind of cool. Also, is this okay? Are people mad? What happened here? That's how much power this guy had. When his father became Pope Alexander VI in 1471, Cesare, at just age 15, was made into a bishop, and then 3 years later, a cardinal. One of the biggest scandals still to this day is that Jesus' early appearance is based off the young Borgia. The claim comes from novelist Alexandre Dumas, who apparently heard it from biblical theorists. Apparently Jesus was depicted as a non-European because he was Jewish, but the Borgia Pope, our madman, decided to make a more European-looking Jesus, so he used his illegitimate son Cesare as their new model.
At number 7, kissing sheets. For thousands of years, monarchs worried about the threat of being poisoned by their enemies, and so they thought of an array of precautions to take in order to prevent being taken out by some kind of spicy death sauce or something. Many monarchs hired tasters to try their food before it was given to the king to make sure that it wasn't poisoned, but some monarchs were also afraid of being poisoned through something that they touched. This is why Henry VIII hired someone with a very important job to make sure that his bed wasn't poisoned. The person who was tasked with making the king's bed was also required to kiss every part of his bed in the morning. They would kiss the pillows, sheets, and blankets to prove that someone hadn't smeared poison on it. The king was also concerned with people poisoning clothing too, so his clothes as well as his son's clothes were also tested for poison before getting dressed. At number 6, eternal youth. I know that there are a lot of people out there who want to live forever. I am one of those people. I am afraid of dying, but I also want to see what humanity will look like many years from now until the sun consumes the earth. Unfortunately, that's kind of impossible, at least for now, until we come up with some kind of way to make people live longer. But this idea of prolonging your life has been around for thousands of years, and one Chinese emperor was super obsessed with the idea and really tried his best to live for at least another 10,000 years. Emperor Ying Zhang was obsessed with finding a magic elixir that would make him live longer, and he demanded that his subjects find this immortality elixir for him. Now, even though he brought a lot of prosperity to people during his rule, he never let go of his demand for immortality, and it put a lot of pressure on his underlings to find him something to help him live forever, but obviously that didn't happen. He was so concerned with his lifespan that he even brought magicians into his court. His obsession alienated him from his people, and after all of that effort trying to live longer, he died at the age of 49. At number 5, no bathing. These days, bathing is kind of a necessary thing. You gotta be clean, you have to smell nice, you have to practice proper hygiene. But back in the olden days, this was the complete opposite, and nobles rarely ever bathed, and it was kind of a trend. Over time, physicians began to believe that bathing was dangerous, and obviously the nobility tried to protect their lives and well-being at all costs, and so they just stopped bathing. In a popular 16th century medical book, it was advised, quote, "Use not baths or stews nor sweat too much, for all openeth pores of a man's body maketh the venomous air to open and for to infect the blood," end quote. So yeah, They thought that taking a bath would make you sick. In the late 15th century, Queen Isabella of Spain would go around bragging about the fact that she had only ever bathed twice in her whole life. Weird flex, but okay. King James IV apparently never bathed, and his hygiene was so bad that he passed on lice to other people who went into a room that was frequented by the king. He also never washed his hands before eating and would just rub his fingers with the wet end of a napkin. These people were gross. At number 4, Prankster King. You know that you're a spoiled king when you can pull pranks on people constantly and never have anyone try and stop you or fight back. This was basically the life of King Christian VII of Denmark, who was known for being pretty childish and playing pranks on people his whole life. He was a troublemaker through and through. He was known to play pranks on his grandmother by putting pins in her throne, and he would throw things at her, and he even ran through the streets with his friend and his mistress, destroying shops and patronizing brothels. He even made his own torture rack, had himself tied to it, and flogged. Why? I have an idea, but I don't want to think about that one too hard. One of the other weird things that he was known to do was leapfrog over dignitaries when they would bow to him. This guy was really quite immature.
Number 3, Lucrezia Borgia. Oh boy, where do we start with this one? The life of this woman reads like a damn 15th century opera. Dramatic, over the top, and tragic. Lucrezia's first marriage was a messy one, as she was very much used as a pawn. It was a political match between Giovanni Sforza, whom she married when she was just 13, and he was 26, and we know that didn't end well. Her father chose to annul the marriage when a more lucrative match appeared. He declared that he was impotent in an attempt to preserve his daughter's chastity, and the marriage was annulled. However, at the time, she was 6 months pregnant with someone's baby. Not Giovanni's though. This scandal Alexander covered up only to reveal the child 3 years later. Her second husband, Alfonso, she apparently loved dearly before he was mysteriously strangled to death in his sleep. But beyond her love life, Lucrezia was rumored to be an infamous poisoner. It was alleged that she wore a hollow ring that she would fill with poison and use at her leisure. She was even implicated in Juan's death. A lot of rumors, a lot of drama, the scandals seem never ending with Lucrezia Borgia.
Number 2, too cool for school. We all know somebody who went to a private school later on in their life and then they started to change a little. You know, maybe they're doing more hair flips, they start saying words like whomst, you know, stuff like that. Well, when Rachel said the scandals with Lucrezia are never ending, she was onto something, of course. Young Lucrezia was given the best education. Now, today's standards, when you have a family this high up, that's not surprising. But back in those days, young girls were dependent on convents for their education. So nuns would teach them godly obedience, you know, that's the whole point. Lucrezia's education was deemed a degenerate one. Oh, you went to Harvard? Wow, what a degenerate. How could you? Hashtag the Lord.
Number 1, man. What the heck? Banquet of chestnuts. Whatever euphemism popped into your head right now is probably not far off, so just like put it in the comments because I want to see what one's the best. Here at number 1 we have the Banquet of Chestnuts, and no, I'm not talking about chestnuts roasting on an open fire unless you're into that. The Banquet of Chestnuts was the most famous Halloween party in the history of the world. Basically what went down was a giant orgy. October 30th, 1501, a massive banquet was organized in the papal palace of all places, which included nobility and senior officials of the Catholic Church. But workers of the night and nude entertainment were invited as well, and for the rest of the night, vows of chastity were out the window. They basically played sexy party games. Even the Pope participated. Although it sounds too fantastic to be true, it was legitimized by a first-hand written account. It was hosted by Pope Alexander VI and his son Cesare Borgia. 2 peas in a pod. The banquet was decadent, full with food and delicacies of irresistible quality, along with 50 of Rome's finest lustful entertainers. This even gave insight to the duplicitous and flawed nature of religious authority of the time, preaching one manner of life to the masses and behaving the complete opposite behind closed doors. Number 10, Julie d'Aubigny, a sword-wielding opera singer? Yes, sign me up please. I am so here for this. There is so much to unpack about this story. So she was born the daughter of the secretary of King Louis XIV's Master of Horse. She moved to the court of Versailles in 1682 22, her father was an expert swordsman and educated her alongside the boys he taught because she was his only kid. She even dressed as a boy and excelled at the sport. She ran off with a fencing master and toured, showing off her skills to wide audiences. One audience member, however, couldn't believe she was a woman because she was so good, so she flashed the crowd, who responded with complete stunned silence. She began singing at the Marseille Opera, where she met her first love, a young woman. This woman, though, was packed off to a convent by her family, and Julie followed to help her escape. They burned down the convent and ran off together, and she was actually sentenced to death by the parliament, but Julie would continue to live on, one adventure after the next. She would later be pardoned by parliament and continued to go on to become an opera star, and had many other lovers. Number 9. Bettie Page. If you're a fan of pinup art, then you almost have to be a fan of the one, the only Bettie Page. She is the one who defined the art form. Page was an American pinup icon who scandalized society with her risque and alternative kink modeling photos. We can thank her for the bikini, as it was Page herself who made it popular. Pop stars to this very day model themselves after her, her iconic haircut being found on stars such as Katy Perry and Dita Von Teese. Her poses in her famous photos were found in music videos such as she had a massive amount of influence. She redefined a sexually repressed era with her free spirit and unabashed presentation of her sexuality, but she was taken advantage of a lot of the time. Bettie actually didn't make any royalties after her prince until Hugh Hefner got her an agent, but by the end of the 1950s, Bettie walked away after a nervous breakdown and retired as a born-again Christian. There was a lot of suffering that Bettie didn't show to the world or even admit to herself. Sadly, the woman whose face everyone knew was diagnosed with schizophrenia due to severe trauma from her childhood. For years, no one knew if she had even passed away, but people were still obsessed with her until she was finally tracked down for a documentary. She refused to take any photos but would give interviews over the phone. She finally hired a lawyer to try and recoup some of the money she lost for her image and spent her final days living with her brother in LA. Number 8. Cleopatra. Cleopatra, the woman who had the world talking all the time. She made sure that whenever she entered the room, all eyes and ears were turned in her direction, jaws on the floor. She is one of, if not the most famous Egyptian queen to ever have lived. Believing she was the goddess Isis herself, she prepared dazzling entrances wherever she went. But it wasn't just her looks. In fact, some accounts say she wasn't actually particularly outstanding in that department. It was just the whole package in how she presented herself. It was indeed her wit, charm, intense intelligence that had men and nations kneeling to her. Her brother/husband wasn't a huge fan, as it was clear she was always trying to get past him to hold the whole title. But one way she overstepped her husband was when she had herself delivered to the Roman Emperor Caesar, wrapped in a carpet, naked. She easily won the senior emperor and gained him as her lover, and eventually she even won the Egyptian throne, soon to become the famous Queen of the Nile. Number 7. Cesare and disease. The apple didn't fall far from the tree, especially in the case of Cesare Borgia. Though he wasn't Alexander's favorite son, he was loved dearly ever still. Just like his father, Cesare was prone to indulgence and was quite the ladies' man, but unlucky for many people in Europe at the time, syphilis was basically everywhere. It was a big deal. It was just a matter of time before the terrible disease caught up with him. Precisely who gave it to him is unknown, but historians believe they know when he got it. In the summer of 1497, at the ripe age of 22, he was sent by his father to Naples to broker a marriage for his sister Lucrezia. Naples was full of brothels and ripe with disease. At the time, it seemed no one could escape the disease, as was the result for Cesare. The disease would show up in sweeping cankers, sores, and the skin would be eaten away, sometimes to the bone. This was the case for Cesare, who eventually had to wear a mask to disguise the scars the disease had caused.
Number 6. In the family. Like many traditional royal families, they like to keep everything tight, keep everything close together, a little too close, some would say. Marriages were arranged, you had to marry your own family member, and on top of that, so many of these dudes in history just cheated and partied while the wives gave birth and tended to house duties. It was bullshit. For Italy's original crime family, they kept everything also a little too close. One of the bigger scandals surrounding them was Lucrezia and Cesare doing the dirty. Her first husband, Giovanni Forza, made these claims first. He actually said Lucrezia was getting it on with her brother and father. Yuck and yuck. 2 yucks for the price of 1 yuck. She was named after the Roman noblewoman Lucretia, so this rumor is a pretty ironic one, if true. Most of these rumors came from their enemies, of course, but many have noted that Cesare's intentions to take out Lucretia's husbands had to come from somewhere. This really does sound like Game of Thrones, eh? Wow. I'm on season 4, no spoilers.
Number 5. The death of Juan Borgia. One of the darkest and most mysterious events of the Borgias is the cold case involving Juan Borgia. On June 14, 1497, Juan Borgia was seen leaving a dinner party at his mother's home. After dinner, he sent his companions and his brothers off on a mysterious errand. He had a habit of wandering the streets of Rome in the evening, and his brothers thought, he was just like gonna meet some cool lady. But as I mentioned, he was Alexander's favorite son, so when a day passed, he got worried. On the 16th, a timber merchant came forward and said that on the night of the disappearance, he was waiting for a shipment on the Tiber River. He saw a man with a white horse approach with a body slung over the horse. The 4 men threw the body into the river and threw rocks at it until it sank. Pope Alexander VI immediately had the river searched, and sure enough, they pulled Juan's body from the waves. He was fully clothed with his coin purse still fully attached, ruling out robbery and implying an assassin. Alexander was inconsolable, but the investigation stopped suddenly, implying they discovered who it was and could do nothing about it. The 2 loudest suspects were his very own brothers, Cesare and Joffrey, each having their own jealousies, which provided strong motive.
Number 4. A cold death. Cesare Borgia passed away March 12, 1507. He was in the woods near Vienna, and he was actually on his way to suppress a rebellion against his own brother-in-law, King John. Now, it was terrible weather that day, so what happened was Cesare left town thinking his men were following him, but in reality they actually bailed. They turned around. Yeah, thunderstorms on a horse, they're like, no, pass, obviously. I don't even drive when it's raining. I'm like, no. Subsequently, he was surrounded by his enemy and was stabbed to death. But the thing is, those men were ordered to capture Cesare alive, but because of the storm, and it was dark, and the fact that he was all alone, they didn't realize that this was him. His armor was brought back to Cesare's squire, and that's when reality sadly sunk in.
Number 3. Mae West.
I see a man in your life.
What, only one?
Mae West. As sassy as she was on screen, she was even more so off of it. Her wisecracking, quippy sensuality became a sensation people couldn't get enough of. West started out in vaudeville and Broadway before she hit the big screen, singing and doing acrobatics. By 1926, Mae began to write and produce her own plays, the first being titled Sex. Her performance was of a woman of the night, and you can imagine the stir she caused. It also earned her an 8-day jail sentence for corrupting the morals of youth. She loved to ridicule social attitudes towards sexuality, which became a part of her trademark style. She was also a big supporter of the gay community, even writing a play called Drag as a celebration of drag in New York City, on top of it being a living room comedy. As you can guess, this also stirred up some serious controversy. But despite it all, West seemed to enjoy the reaction of the private and reserved public, loving every minute that it made her famous. Number 2. Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson is most famously known for her work to help support the LGBTQ+ movement in New York City for nearly 25 years. Marsha played a key role in the Stonewall riots that found the gay pride movement today. She was a drag performer and black trans woman who did everything she could to advocate for trans youth, homeless people, and people living through the AIDS epidemic. She even used money she earned as a night worker to help fund a refugee for homeless people. Along with fellow activist Sylvia Rivera, she founded STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which created a safe place for homeless trans youth to sleep and feel safe. It was the first LGBTQ+ shelter in North America. Sadly, however, Johnson never got to see how far the movement would take the world, as she died in 1992. Her body was found in the Hudson River, and it was ruled that she took her own life. However, many suspect foul play, as her case was never actually investigated, they just assumed. Many activists believe today that someone had indeed taken her life. Marsha P. Johnson danced, performed, and rioted her way to making the public listen to the voices people were afraid to hear, and her legacy lives on today. And last but not least, Rosa Parks. One of the loudest scandals in history that ferried in waves of change was the decision Rosa Parks made one day to stay seated on a bus. It was a scandal that transformed the world. In 1955, Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white man from Montgomery, Alabama. This simple and brave refusal initiated the civil rights movement in the United States. Her actions inspired the Montgomery bus boycott, led by a young Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Up until this point, bus segregation was enforced, and the black community was forced to sit in the back of the bus always. It was also customary for bus drivers to request that black citizens give up their seat to white citizens. So one day when Parks was riding home from work, she was exhausted, the bus driver asked part of the back of the bus to stand to make room for a white citizen. Parks was the only one who refused, and she was arrested as a result. In her autobiography, Parks writes, and I quote, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in."
At number 10, royal enemas. Apparently, back in the day, enemas were all the rage amongst the elite. It was believed that enemas were good for your health, so everyone was doing it to try and live a little longer than the rest of those commoners and peasants. One person who really just couldn't get enough enemas in his life was King Louis XIV. It is believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. When I tell you this guy was obsessed, I'm not kidding. One year, Louis received 212 enemas. In just the 1 year. And of course, he had to make his enemas a little jazzy and couldn't just use water like any other person. Oh no. My guy was using things like almond milk. His enemas were also sometimes scented with orange or rose, and sometimes even colored just to make it a little more special. To get an idea of just how obsessed the elite were with receiving enemas, just think about the fact that a French duchess once received one during a court ball. The duchess was in the middle of having a conversation with Louis XIV, and during this conversation, one of her maids came over, snuck under her dress, and gave the duchess an enema on the spot. Ew. These people were so weird. At number 9, pampered pony. I'm sure I can speak for most people when I say when you have a pet, you love and care for that thing like it is your child, right? Well, one Roman emperor might have taken that concept a little bit too far, because saying that he was obsessed with his horse is an understatement. The Roman emperor known as Caligula had a horse named Incitatus. Caligula was a horse racing enthusiast, so Incitatus was his pride and joy, and not too many people were all that thrilled about it, to be honest. When I tell you this horse was treated better than most people have ever been, I'm not kidding. The horse's stall was made out of marble, his manger was made out of ivory, and he was even fed oats flaked with gold. Caligula was also very adamant about his horse receiving a good and restful sleep before a race, and he was so serious about it that he made guards stand outside of the horse's stable to make sure that the horse remained undisturbed while it slept. This horse even had its own furniture. Like, what is he gonna do with it? He's a horse. Caligula was so fond of his horse that he even made it a priest and promised to make him consul, which was the lead position in the Roman government after the emperor, highly coveted by senators. This was the last straw for people because the emperor was putting his horse above his own people, so he was assassinated. Now, before I carry on telling you guys about the wild and crazy things that kings did back in the day, I would like to first ask you guys to consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and also maybe think about subscribing as well to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Mumia medicine. It's safe to say that medicine from the past is very different from modern times. These days we have pharmaceuticals to treat illnesses, but back in the days of old there were very different and quite questionable methods of treating ailments, and one of those methods included cannibalism. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was common practice for elites like priests, kings, and other nobles to consume remedies that included human bones, blood, and fat as medicine to treat ailments from headaches to epilepsy, and this practice was called mumia medicine. At first, it started with people using Egyptian mummies and skulls from Irish graves for use in medicine, as bones would be ground and used in different tinctures for various uses. But soon, other parts of the body started to be used. Human fat was later used to treat ailments on the outside of the body, and blood would be consumed as well, as it was believed to contain the vitality of life. Several monarchs were known to use mumia medicine, like Charles II and William II of England, Francois I of France, and Christian IV of Denmark.
Number 7, Mary Laveau. Mary Laveau is an absolute legend in practice and by lore. Her mysterious past and practices made her the absolute talk of the town. She was the voodoo queen of New Orleans. Voodoo or Voodoo is a combination of West African religions brought over to the Americas through the slave trade. It then blended with Christianity and the traditions of indigenous peoples. Marie was the first generation of her family to be born free, but due to laws and practices of the time, Marie and her husband bought and sold around 8 slaves in their lifetime, though it was also also believe that she aided in the escape of slaves as well. But what she is most famous for is her work as a voodoo queen in New Orleans. Many wealthy and politically connected individuals paid Laveau to aid in personal advice, intervention, and protection from evil energy. She also worked as a hairdresser, which gave her access to information regarding her clients because honestly, let's be honest, everyone's hairdresser is their therapist. Honestly, what didn't this woman do? She also ran an orphanage and helped many children have a safe home. Laveau is a popular figure in legend and lore due to her relationship to the occult, but her role in society was much larger and a little bit more scandalous than that. Number 6. Luisa Casati. Also known as the Divine Marquise, we have yet another woman of mystery on this list. Luisa Casati beguiled everyone she came across. She was a young, well-born heiress who married into the Lombardy aristocracy. The mundane was an insult to her. She dressed in extravagance wherever she went, dyeing her hair fiery shades, darkening her eyes with makeup and contouring with kohl. Her guiding principle in life was to imitate art, as opposed to art imitating life. But due to her extravagant presentation, she became the muse of dozens of famous artists. Thanks to her immense fortune, she traveled the world, leaving a trail of lavish parties that even Gatsby would gawk at. Every party topped the last. She had a collection of very special drugs, naked servants gilded in gold, wild animals. Her tombstone reads, "Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety." Number 5. Madam C.J. Walker. Madam C.J. Walker broke records and blasted through glass ceilings as the first self-made female person of color millionaire in America. She made her fortune thanks to her homemade line of hair care products for black women. Her parents were slaves who worked in Louisiana, but she was the first of their children to be born free after the Emancipation Proclamation. After an experience with hair loss, she created the Walker system of hair care. She had a knack for self-promotion that started by selling directly to the clients and then employed beauty culturalists to hand sell her wares. She not only continued to build her business, but she also kept a hand behind her to help lead future generations towards success. Walker used her fortune to help fund scholarships for women, donated large sums to NAACP and the Black YMCA, among other charities. An absolute legacy. Number 4. Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft is a feminist icon who began setting the groundwork for women's rights all the way back in the late 1700s. She authored A Vindication of Rights of Women in 1792, which is considered the earliest treatise advocating for women's rights. Wollstonecraft was born in the Age of the Enlightenment in England. The Enlightenment is pretty much as it sounds, an intellectual period which advocated for reason to obtain objective truths. As part of this movement, Mary and her sister founded a girls' school in London in 1784 to educate young girls. She continued to write articles advocating for the education and equality of women in society throughout her life. She believed that if women weren't educated to the same degree as men were, then society would come to a standstill. Sadly, Mary never fully saw the success of her ideas. She died during the birth of her second daughter, Mary, who, funny enough, would go on to write one of the most controversial books in history, Frankenstein.
At number 3. Saints in bed. I understand the desire to feel protected by whatever gods or saints you might believe in. That's one of the whole points of religion. However, I think some people can take that idea a little bit too far, and by some people I mean the Spanish royal family. These guys took religion very, very seriously, and they believed that following religion heavily would allow God to heal them when they were sick. So, when a member of the royal family was ill, doctors would remove body parts or even entire corpses of saints from churches and monasteries and would put them in bed with the person who was ill. Yeah, they slept with the corpses of dead saints to be healed of their sickness. Could you imagine if that was still how medicine was practiced today? At number 2, rat court-martial. There has been a record of many kings throughout history who were complete children through and through. Even though many of them grew into adulthood, they still acted immature, and one of the greatest examples of that was Peter III of Russia. He was not a good ruler or a good husband to his wife, who would later become Catherine the Great. Peter spent every night in bed with her playing toy soldiers because he was obsessed with his little dolls. He was so obsessed, in fact, that when a rat chewed the head off one of his toy soldiers, he was so upset that he held a proper military court-martial for the rat. He proclaimed the rat guilty of treason and had it hung in a tiny gallows that he had built for the occasion. It was weird, but in the end that bizarre event helped Catherine overthrow her husband, so I guess it kind of worked out for someone. And finally, at number 1, groom of the stool. Guys, I found the worst job in history. You think working at the 1-star Domino's Pizza in your neighborhood is bad? Wait until you find out about the groom of the stool. The groom of the stool was a job created during the reign of Henry VIII, where the role was to monitor and assist the king in his bowel movements. They would carry around a commode at all times, and they were also tasked with monitoring the king's diet and meal times, and would organize the king's days around his break times. They were also tasked with undressing the king for him to do his business, and it's also been suggested that they would have had to, quote, cleanse the royal posterior as well. Sounds like a pretty crappy job to me, but I'm not funny. I'll leave.